We have Commissioner Purcell here. Will you please say hello and check your audio?
Hello, good morning. Glad to be here.
And Commissioner Bowers.
I'm here on my phone. I'll be on my phone.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Batts, I see that you're on the phone.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you. Do we have other commissioners on the line with us?
This is LaTanya. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, LaTanya.
Hi, good morning. Mr. Campbell will not be joining us this morning.
Okay, and any word from Commissioner Ansari?
No, I'll give him a call. Is Ms. Coleman on here?
I'm not seeing Commissioner Coleman either.
Okay, I'll give both of them a call. Thank you.
And do we have representation from our board attorney? I believe Saul's on the phone.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning, Saul. Can you let us know, do we have a quorum for either the Finance or Development Committee?
We do for the finance. For development, we do not.
Okay.
I don't believe there's anything for decision or recommendation for decision on this agenda.
I believe you are correct. So should I just be calling the meeting to order for finance?
I think that's I think it's the best. I don't know. We do have, I think we do have Chair Purcell's also on the development committee. I'm trying to see if there's anybody else on that committee, but I don't believe there is anybody else. I think you can go ahead and convene both, even though there's not a quorum for development.
Okay, thank you. So let me call the meeting to order for Joint Finance and Development Committee. And let me welcome Councilman Withers for joining us today. Before we turn the floor over to you, Saul, will you just acknowledge that we're holding this meeting virtually, please?
Have a couple of new wrinkles as well. So,
okay.
But before that, just to make it clear to the public that the meeting is being held pursuant to Executive Order 16 of the Governor of Tennessee. From time to time, he has extended that, and he has issued Executive Order 60, which has extended the time period for virtual meetings until the end of October. In that regard, the public has been invited to attend this meeting, and that the meeting will be recorded and will be available for viewing on YouTube in the future. Two new things that have come up when the governor extended to end of October. The comptroller and the executive order did make it clear that to the extent there's going to be any kind of votes, they need to be done by roll call. And the second thing that the extension made clear is that the meeting can only pursue if there's a motion from the governing body to go ahead and to determine that the meeting is being held to conduct essential business of the agency. And so we need a motion, and we need to pass that. So those are the two new wrinkles. Jim, I don't know if you want to talk about the new news we have on Commissioner Bowers, but I also want to let everybody know that Commissioner Campbell, although he's not with us today, he did successfully register to vote. So very, very good news. There was a clerical error where they thought that he thought he was convicted of a felony. He never had been convicted of a felony, but it was on his record that he had, and that's why he was denied. We got that all straightened out. And so now he's actually registered to vote and can vote in the next election. So that's great news. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Man deserves a vote. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful news for Commissioner Campbell. And so, Saul, if I'm understanding correctly, we need a motion to be passed that we are holding this meeting virtually solely for conducting essential business. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. And at this point, I need to take roll call on that vote. So, Ms. Batts, can you let me know if you are a yes or a no?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm still not seeing any other commissioners. I'm also a yes. So I believe that completes our roll call for the vote.
Bill Purcell, yes.
Thank you. Bill Purcell, yes. Sorry, Kay Bowers?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. And so with that, the motion passes. Was there additional news that we needed to cover related to Commissioner Bowers before we give the floor to Council Member Withers? Jim?
Well, just congratulations that Commissioner Bowers is reappointed by Metro Council on Tuesday.
That's wonderful news, Commissioner Bowers.
Thank you.
That's excellent. And I see that Commissioner Ansari has also joined us. Welcome. And we are rearranging the agenda a bit to give the floor to Councilmember Withers to talk about the 5 Development District. Let me turn the floor over to you.
Okay, good morning, and thank you everyone for your service to our county, especially to Commissioner Bowers. You're such a valuable voice to have. I'm glad to have you back on board at MDHA and that commission. And I appreciate everyone giving me your time this morning. I am taking time off work to speak with you about the 5 Points Redevelopment District, and I appreciate you rearranging the agenda so that I can hopefully have discussion and answer any questions or learn any thoughts that you have, and then get back on the clock at work. So the 5 Points Redevelopment District, certainly as Mr. Purcell knows, dates back to efforts that were underway to begin revitalizing the 5 Points area in the 1980s. And there were a couple of different processes that were followed over time. The redevelopment district itself for 5 Points was adopted I want to say in the early 90s, and then the design guidelines themselves were adopted later. They were adopted in the year 2000. Pardon me. When the design guidelines were originally created, the central portion of what we call 5 Points today was not included in the Lockland Springs East End Conservation Overlay, which had been adopted in 1985. So there was kind of a hole in the middle of that area that was outside of the Lockland Springs East End Conservation Overlay. However, other portions of it were in the overlay that was in place at that time. So the design guidelines were adopted in the year 2000, and I believe 2003. Then Councilmember Eileen Behan, who still lives in the area and is a great asset, worked with the community to add a lot of the rest of those parcels into the Lockland Springs East End Conservation Overlay over to 10th Street. And so as a result of that, most, but not quite all, of the 5 Points Development District is included in the Lockland Springs East End Conservation Overlay District, which also provides very valuable design guidance and preservation guidance. So so that was in 2003. Most of the area was included. In 2005, then District 6 Councilmember Mike Jameson, who also still around. We have a lot of continuity, which is great. But then Councilmember Mike Jameson introduced legislation which set the sort of end date or expiration date of the redevelopment district as being December 31st of this year. When the my predecessor on the council, Councilmember Peter Westerholm, had worked with MDHA to look at some potential adjustments to the land use plan portion of the redevelopment district. As y'all may know, but there's a land use plan that says some parcels are approved for mixed uses and some are limited to residential, and that often but doesn't always line up with what their base zoning actually is. And Councilmember Westerholm worked with MDHA and had public meetings to look at what community consensus could be found to, maybe make adjustments to which parcels were going to be approved for mixed uses. That was in 2015. And that was actually controversial at that time on the council for some reasons that I won't totally go into, but there was actually a motion that was made, I believe, by Councilmember Charlie Tiger, to that as of 2015, that they thought that the area was no longer blighted, and a motion was made on the council floor to actually cancel it at that time, and that motion didn't pass at that time. But the reality is that the Five Points Redevelopment District has been immensely successful. The base zoning districts for the commercial properties in particular that exist in Five Points are old base zoning districts from the 70s, if not older. They're often called for commercial services. The base zoning allows a wide variety of uses, including things like a lot of automobile uses, used car lots, liquor stores. There were a lot of things that the community was hoping to limit from opening in the area. And also the community, through the design guidelines piece, was hoping that new buildings that were constructed would be built up to the street. You'd have parking in the rear, off of the alley if it was present. There were a lot of really forward-thinking aspects of the design guidelines that were authored by folks such as Hunter G., who also is still around in this community. But they put it together through a lot of community input at that time. But since that time, the Metro Planning Department and the Metro Council have adopted a lot of new upgrades, I guess I would call them, to base zoning districts that do a lot of that work already in terms of building placement, maximum building height, encouraging mixed uses such as having residential above ground floor retail. We have a lot of those districts today, and the county has kind of caught up with the visionary work of the East Nashville community from back in the 80s and the 90s. And so with the success of the redevelopment district, raising prices in the area and having a lot of other benefits too, but there was already at the time that when I was elected the first term in 2015, a lot of thought that the redevelopment district had really sort of served its purpose. When I was reelected in 2019, which was last year, I indicated to the neighborhoods that with the redevelopment district being set to expire, that I would work with them to try to find some ways to see what steps we could take to continue that good design guidance in particular that a lot of people are interested in. So at that time, I had approached the planning department to see if they would sort of take the existing design guidelines themselves and adopt that as an urban design overlay. And the planning department declined to do that, partly because of workload issues that they have, because there is so much going on in Metro these days, but also because of a recommendation that most of the area is in the Lachlan Springs Easton Conservation Overlay that does provide design guidance, and that we do have those new base zoning districts available. So the guidance from the planning department was at that time, to begin looking at adjusting the base zoning districts to see what would line up best to do most of that work, again, that was in those design guidelines. So I did begin that work. I've had roundtable conference calls and Zoom meetings with the planning department staff, the Metro Historic Zoning Commission staff, the codes department, and MDHA. And for the most part, what the plan that we have come up with is, and presented at a community meeting that I'll discuss in a little bit, but for the most part, what the proposal is to sort of unify a lot of the base zoning, particularly along the corridors, along Woodland Street and along 11th. A few years ago, along Gallatin, sort of a corridor-wide rezoning was done that took a lot of parcels from a lot of different categories on Gallatin and rezoned to MUGA to create consistency of expectations along Gallatin. And that kind of is the thought here, is that along Woodland, we would unify the zoning districts as MULA, pardon me, along Woodland and along 11th. And part of the reason for that is that along Woodland, from around 8th over to definitely over to 12th, but there's a long corridor where you have a mix of base zoning districts where it is CS commercial services, CL commercial limited, or MUL already. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge. A lot of the zoning on South 11th Street is actually already MULA or MUL. And so the overall proposal is to unify the zoning, if we can get general agreement, along that entire stretch of Woodland and along 11th, just to make it all MULA. That would bring consistency. It would, MULA would typically allow buildings, it would require buildings to be built to the street as the design guidelines require. It would typically allow buildings of a max height of around 3 stories, which is pretty consistent with the design guidelines. It would do a lot of the things that the redevelopment district design guidelines ask for anyway, and it would create consistent expectations, both from the neighbors and from the property owner, business owner community about what their uses are that they're allowed to do on parcels and what their building entitlements are. For the uses in MULA, MULA would remove those base zoning allowances for things like used car lots that we wanted to remove anyway. So it would remove some of those adverse uses that the community back in the day had wanted to exclude, but it also really promotes the mixed use with housing above, which was also a community interest. We didn't have a whole lot of that actually got constructed necessarily, but the MULA allows that in a very consistent way. What we have seen, I would say, in learning from my predecessors, for folks who've been in the community longer than I have, the redevelopment district was so instrumental and the community was so progressive back in the 80s and the 90s. They really took bold steps to remove some truly adverse uses that had been there. And actually, even at that time, utilized things like community development block grants to actually build more affordable housing in the community, which is great. Unfortunately, the redevelopment district area no longer meets the qualifications from an income level for some of those grants. But that just shows again how progressive it was when it started in the 80s and the 90s. What I can share as a council member and as a community member who's been involved for a long time is that the community sometimes has concerns about a particular development or something like that. And I'm not finding recently that the redevelopment district itself is stopping things that the community is interested in stopping. And another factor of it is that sometimes it creates ambiguity or confusion or even arguments about whether or not uses are permitted or not. And so Parker Brown and I and John Michael at Codes will all be kind of going around saying, hey, is this allowed or not? And it leaves a lot of interpretation. And so again, that gets me back to wanting to have a consistent set of expectations for the property owners and the neighbors about what the building entitlements look like in terms of at least maximum height. The Metro Historic Zoning Commission would still be the ultimate decider about building height where it fits in context. But maximum height of a building, maximum floor area ratio for the volume of the building and where the uses are. The property owners and the neighbors could then simply just go to the land use tables, which are publicly available, and say, is this use allowed or not? And that simplifies a lot of things, which I think is better for everyone. For some of the parcels that are a little bit further back into the neighborhood that had legacy commercial zoning at the kind of the old H.G. Hill grocery store type buildings that we love and have great businesses in them. The recommendation with the planning department staff and historic is for those not to be MUL, which is a little bit larger, but the MUNA, which is a little bit more modest in terms of building allowances, and also is a little bit more restrictive in uses, which I think is appropriate for those that are a little bit more back in the neighborhood and are residential adjacent. So that's the overall outlines of it. I've got lots of documents available. I'm actually working on, well, I had a community meeting about this proposal that was very well attended a few weeks ago. And I think while we do have neighbors that are interested in potentially extending the redevelopment district, which I can discuss later, I think even those neighbors and community members were appreciative of the work that has gone into all the departments working with me to try to figure out for the rezoning piece what is the best fit. And so that community meeting was very well attended, and I had lots of good comments about that. I have had this is a lot of parcels, so I haven't had in-person conversations with every single property owner, but I do actually have a mail piece. I'm working with a local East Nashville business, and I'm doing a mail piece that will have a before and after map, as well as a copy of the land use tables, which I'm mailing out this week to every one of the property owners that are affected, of the commercial property owners, that is. And this item has been introduced. It will have a public hearing before the Metro Planning Commission on Thursday, November the 12th. The map is presently available on the Development Tracker website, which a lot of people utilize. So we do have a public hearing scheduled at the Planning Commission on November the 12th, and then before the Metro Council on December the 1st. Assuming that all those go well, the legislation for the rezoning piece would be in place, would be approved at final third reading by Metro Council on December 15th, and would then be in place well in advance before the redevelopment district expires. And that really has been my goal. Like a little bit, we had a tornado and we had COVID, so a lot of things wasn't able to have as many community meetings as maybe I would have liked earlier in the process. But I do feel like I've got a lot of support from property owners, even from a lot of the neighborhood groups. And I've run the ideas past some of the land use attorneys in town, just wanting to, see if there are any red flags, if they have any concerns that might be raised, or positive suggestions. Overall, for this redevelopment plan, I've heard a lot of positive feedback. I have a letter. I was really pleased to receive a letter from Jimmy Granberry, who owns a parcel, a pretty significant parcel. Jimmy Granberry sent a letter of support for the rezoning plan on his letterhead, which I really appreciate. So I believe that, once this notification that I'm mailing out goes out to the property owners, I've asked them to reach me back at my Metro Council email by no later than October 30th, so that way I can be as prepared as possible for that Planning Commission hearing on November the 12th. But that is overall as my plan of what to do for now. The redevelopment district, as I understand it from staff at MDHA, no longer meets the blight requirements that would be needed in order to extend it. And the Planning Commission and others are recommending a rezoning process, which I've done a lot of work on. Can still tweak it, certainly. But I would say that the urban design overlay idea isn't necessarily dead per se, but if we were to extend that in some fashion through the planning department, there are a lot of really good ideas in the design guidelines, but some of them, frankly, are a little bit dated. Some of the things that are in the redevelopment district guidelines include a ban on putting in fake mansard roofs across buildings, which was a trend back in the day. In today's climate, frankly, a lot of people would look at that building and say it's retro chic, right? And so, I don't think that that's stellar architecture necessarily, right? But but some things have changed over 20 years. And so if we were to do a UDO approach at some point, I think it would actually be beneficial if we can get the Planning Commission on board with that. It would be beneficial to maybe open it up and see what are some things that maybe we no longer need, and what are some things that we might want to tweak today. And so that could still potentially be a different process that we could pursue even in the near future. For one of the pieces that we are losing out of the design guidelines when they expire is regulations on signage. With the passage of a recent Metro Council bill, which I did not vote for, but which passed, and that's how democracy works, allowed home-based businesses, which includes general office in all parcels. Back when the redevelopment district was done, there was kind of a lot of battle over, like, can you have buildings that were built as houses, and some of them can be offices and some can't. And even that aspect has been a little bit nullified by the Metro Council's passage of legislation that allows general office everywhere, which I don't agree with, but it passed. And so some of the neighbors, particularly in the Lockland Springs East End area, for instance, one of the positive, productive comments they did give me was that they might be interested in looking at some signage regulations. And so what I have raised to the Metro Historic Zoning Commission staff is to say, is that something that maybe we could apply to the conservation overlay design guidelines through that process? Because the way the boundaries are drawn within the redevelopment district itself, if that was only in the redevelopment district, that would only apply sort of to pieces of Woodland, 16th, and Fatherland, and it would leave lots of gaps where you would still have this other signage that happens with no controls on it. So that's another idea where I've taken community feedback. We don't have a definitive answer yet, but I'm trying to work with the Historic Zoning Commission staff to see if we might be able to add that to the conservation overlay design guidelines overall. So that way the benefit of that regulation would go to the whole district rather than just some of these selected parcels. So that is an overview, I guess, and I would welcome any thoughts or questions from commissioners or other participants.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Weathers. Let me open the floor to commissioners to ask questions. Yes, Commissioner Purcell.
So I join the chair, and let me just say on behalf of of all of us how much we appreciate, Councilman, you're taking the morning to join us here. If it makes you feel any better, I'm not being paid for this either. So just to cheer you up. And I don't think any of the other commissioners are. The staff that's on the phone, obviously, this is their job. But I know and understand and appreciate what it means to take time from your work for this, and it means a lot to us. And there's no one, I think, in this meeting that doesn't understand what an incredible amount of time council members commit. As I note, the meetings now last for many days, it seems, and in addition, let me say for all commissioners, there is no council district that is more involved, engaged, some might say demanding, but I'm sure the council member wouldn't use that word, but the 6th councilmanic district in which I'm honored to live is an especially engaged community. And so I have a great respect for what Council Member Withers has done to keep people together, to bring them together. His reelection is an affirmation of that, and obviously his work here is consistent with that. There are a few things and one reason that this meeting is so timely, of course, and important is that you may be aware that we have received a letter, and this is a unique letter. Actually, it's not unheard of that all of the neighborhoods agree on anything, but it doesn't happen all the time. And in this case, we have what I consider a rare letter signed by all 3 neighborhoods, Edgefield, East End, and Lockland Springs. I happen to live in Lockland Springs, where Jim and the staff obviously is in the Edgefield neighborhood. And I think, as you know, Council Member Withers, the Edgefield neighborhood in particular has been an extraordinary partner with MDHA throughout the Envision Casey process. That also is not something that has always been true. In fact, there has been historically, let me just be, as to the present, they are our partner and they are our ally in literally all that we're doing. So when Edgefield, Lockland Springs, and East End, and for a little background, East End used to be part of Lockland Springs and seceded. I was actually a brand new neighborhood member in 1983 or 4, and attended my first neighborhood meeting where I witnessed the split of East End, just to give you a sense of history that these neighborhoods have not always been totally copacetic. But here suddenly we find them all together in a letter that is unequivocal and says explicitly that they ask us to extend this redevelopment district for, I think, 5 years. So that is a very different approach and is in some fashion reflective of neighborhood views. Why don't you, if you would, talk to us about that and how you would suggest we reconcile those two things?
Yes. Well, thank you. And, again, over the course of the last few years, I mean, even among the neighborhood groups themselves, there had been some thought that the redevelopment district had largely done its work in some quarters. District 6 folks rarely agree on much of anything, so there are always different takes on that. One of the, even when, like I said, about this time last year when we started the new term, there was not necessarily an overwhelming expression of interest, even from these same neighborhoods at that time, to extend the redevelopment district. One of the factors that really has kind of changed is, which I think their letter acknowledges, is the tornado that happened, and so in consultation with staff again, the tornado, that's MDHA staff, that is. The tornado is an act of God and it's a one-time event, but it is not, the tornado has not changed whether or not blight exists in the community long-term. One of the things that I would note is that when the tornado happened, we have 8 council districts that were affected by the tornado, and Vice Mayor Schulman created a tornado sort of committee of us 8 council members. And in participating in those committee meetings, when I go to my colleagues such as Councilmember Brandon Taylor or Conce Toombs, who represent the North Nashville area, and you look at what the needs are up there, there are huge numbers of buildings where no one can get a hold of the landlord at all. The homeowners often, in more cases, if they were a homeowner, did not have insurance at all or did not have adequate insurance. The needs are that you have folks that are being evicted from their homes, that the needs are that really a lot of sort of life or death needs to get people medications, to get them to laundry services, to walk by hand 3 meals a day to their houses to keep them alive. That's the level of devastation in North Nashville. In the Donaldson area, there's a lot of damage, particularly in Hermitage. I mean, I was really struck by my council colleague, Aaron Evans, who represents Hermitage. And there are large apartment complexes that are destroyed, and there's large amounts of displacement. They have areas where apartment or other communities were built as HOAs. The HOAs supposedly were supposed to be keeping up with some of the infrastructure and are responsible for it. It's private infrastructure, but they never have. It wasn't insured. They don't know how to do it. So when you look at what those sort of life or death needs are in the tornado impact area, then you come to District 6. And what you see in District 6 is we have needs, but we have a very high percentage of homeowner occupancy, a very high percentage of folks with insurance, and some people's insurance is better than others. We have very, very little displacement. One of the ironies of short-term rentals is that the short-term rental market sort of collapsed because of COVID. That opened up units. And we have a lot of neighbors whose houses were destroyed or are being renovated or rebuilt, who actually are able to stay in our neighborhood because their neighbors opened up those units that were next door. But we have at least a dozen houses already in the Lockland Springs conservation overlay area that were destroyed, that are already in the process of being rebuilt. They've already got their permits and approvals through the Metro Historic Zoning Commission. We've got very large buildings, particularly the Whitecap building, but also the building that's home to Boom Boss. But we've got very large buildings that were impacted by the tornado, if not in some cases totally destroyed, but in some cases heavily damaged. And every week we have one of those buildings that is trading as is for a sales price of 7 figures. And this is kind of what my message to my neighbors is that if it were easy to extend the redevelopment district, I would be on board with that. But in looking at how the needs are so different in the tornado impact area in this county, and how we truly have affordable housing crisis already in place in North Nashville that is dramatically exacerbated by the tornado. Whereas in East Nashville, we have folks who largely have insurance and largely are getting through their permit process. They largely have insurance that is paying for them to rent an apartment nearby. Just that need isn't the same. I can't equate those two. I can't, in good conscience, go before my colleagues at the Metro Council and say that this area, which a lot of my colleagues call now a rich part of town, it is one of the most expensive areas on a per square foot basis in the entire Middle Tennessee area. That's where East Nashville is today. I can't go to them, I don't feel, and say, I'm going to ask you to take a somewhat questionable or debatable step of extending a redevelopment district that staff do not believe meets the requirements because the area is blighted. I just can't go before my colleagues, I don't feel, in good conscience. I can't go before my colleagues, especially in North Nashville and Hermitage, and say that this area is blighted in the same way that yours is. I mean, the areas that might need the redevelopment district today is North Nashville. I mean, and they have that to an extent with Phillips Jackson, but it's just those needs are so different. And so I respect that my neighbors want to keep this, the document. I appreciate their desire to request that you extend it. It's just that the reason why we've engaged in a lot of this process to begin with is that staff have indicated that it doesn't meet the state requirements that would be enabling to do that. And so I've got to have another plan in place to protect the neighborhood. And that's why I've done the work that I've done. Another thing that I would add is that some of the things that because I've been asking the neighbors, what specifically out of the redevelopment district are you wanting it to do? What neighbors are expressing a concern about is the actual redevelopment. And does it make logical sense that if neighbors are concerned about overdevelopment, to extend a tool, the first word of which is redevelopment, is that a logical step to take? And the thing that I will kind of close with is that the neighbors have raised concerns about specific plans. And the redevelopment district design guidelines are silent on specific plans. And in fact, if you go back to the 2006 version of the East Nashville Community Plan, it's sort of required that if you were going to do redevelopments in certain areas, that you kind of had to have a specific plan in the 2006 version. That didn't carry through to Nashville Next. But the sort of legacy of means of if the concern among neighbors is specific plans, this document is actually silent on that concern. So that's kind of what I'm saying, is that what I've really asked the neighborhood groups to do is to say, absolutely, they have a right to come before MDHA and do this. And this is a great process. And this is a discussion we need to have publicly. So I appreciate it. But I have communicated to them that, like, after going through the tornado recovery committee meetings with my 7 other colleagues, I just can't go in good faith and tell my colleagues in North Nashville or in Hermitage that are facing mass displacement, real affordable housing crises, real life or death needs, that we need to say that 5 Points is blighted because my neighbors have very, very heightened sensitivities about architectural details. I can't go and say that to them, but I can say this is why I really need everyone to get on board with, at least for now, addressing the base zoning that will get most of that need done, and then maybe come back again, like I said, if there is a desire for an urban design overlay at some point, or if we're seeking to add some language on some things that maybe are going to get dropped, to maybe add that to the conservation overlay design guidelines. I think it'd be great if this body would also lend their support to that, maybe as a legacy thing, just to say that we want to make sure that the positive momentum that the redevelopment district created continues forward. And maybe you would lend your support to those efforts to create some additional tools once we kind of really narrow down what specifically are some things that are still needed.
I appreciate that. This is very helpful to us. We really began our discussion of redevelopment districts just a few months ago. I see Joe Kane we can now see Joe Kane. He's been there all along, but we can now see him. His name has not been called, but he has been several times referred to in a general way. On the larger issue for my fellow commissioners, Councilmember Withers and his concerns for the city, you heard and felt and know. Of course, I'm looking out the window at the largest redevelopment district that we have. And I'm looking at the convention center that was built in the redevelopment district. There are 14 cranes outside of my window now. And one might wonder about the needs of the city under some circumstances. I don't, and I don't think MDHA did. The tools, the availability, the opportunities that have been presented for civic purposes, and Mr. Kane was very involved with the convention center construction and the use of the redevelopment tools within that area. The football stadium, the library, the rink, anyway, all that I see out my window here, which I'm lucky to see, is within a redevelopment district and has used these tools. The law is, of course, well, back to were one to drive down Woodland Street today, actually, one would say it looks worse than it did at the time of the creation of the redevelopment district in terms of conditions there. There's no question. I was there at that time. It is true that there was an operating wrecker service at 5 Points, where MDHA now owns a parking lot. But in terms of the general condition of the buildings at the moment, and for now much of this year anyway, the conditions, the visible conditions within the neighborhood are quite rough, actually. Although reconstruction is underway, and there may very well be insurance that'll be available. This was the second tornado that I've lived through in that neighborhood. My church was, as you know, struck, and we don't know when or how the East End United Methodist Church will come back, but we're hopeful about all that. So the discussion about the conditions of the community, I think front of mind for neighborhoods, Councilmember, is the present condition. But then also within the law, and Joe at some point may want to comment on this, are the presentations that they made earlier this year to us are not simply about the existence of blight or removing of blight, but also the prevention of blight, and also having removed blight, the protection of the area so as to not allow its return. That's why, for example, the entire area in Germantown and the area between Germantown and the capital remains highly protected, even though one would look and see that within those areas, Councilmember O'Connell, of course, is highly knowledgeable about this and finds himself with a number of these redevelopment districts contained therein. So the issue again is the removal of blight, but is also the prevention of blight. But in that context, you have, I think, obviously done an incredible amount of work on with planning and with others about the potential for alternatives in land use, which I appreciate got delayed and deferred. It seems like you were on a pretty good track to have all that wrapped up by now, actually, it seems to me. It's probably where you were headed until we got into this crisis. You may want to talk about, and then staff may want to talk as well, about that issue. The redevelopment district will come off on the 31st of December under current plans. It is possible and hoped by you that the Metro Council, that the public meeting will go well before the Planning Commission, that the public meeting in the Metro Council will go well, that the council will follow your recommendation and adopt it, and you have a high level of success in that, I know. But were for any reason your plans not to be fulfilled exactly and precisely as you have outlined them, meaning every step is met exactly on the day or night in which it is heard, then I believe there will be a window that will open. The window will open on January the 1st. The redevelopment district will go away, and the planning, the zoning, rezoning, all the other protections, as well as the prospective. I hadn't even known that there was a thought about the urban design overlay, but that's good to know. But in that window, in that time, all of the existing protections to prevent blight, to protect that area, will be gone. And as you pointed out, it's not just what we think about. It's even signage, for example. Anything, and there are arguments to be made about pending legislation and the like, but most of the time, the effort will be by those who are aggressive to attempt to cause change to begin whenever a window like that opens, and then be grandfathered in basically eternally within our rules. Basically, if there's not a restriction on you and you can begin, in fact, sometimes it can be as little as digging a hole and pouring a sack of concrete in it to begin as Councilman Withers nods. I mean, it's just how it's been done in the past. It begins the process, and now you have an issue joined. Suddenly there is a question: did the pending legislation doctrine prevent codes from issuing the codes permit and so forth? This is, I know, been in your mind. You don't, because you've been working aggressively this year to get all this done, and so I'm wondering a little bit whether or not one. I'll just cut to the chase as I think about it, and then you can respond. And Joe may want to say something as well. Would there be advantage to you, or have you considered the prospect of requesting that we extend the redevelopment district until you have completed your rezoning and your planning process in the council? That would remove that from you, that threat, that fear that there'll be a window open just because of the virus and so forth. I know the neighborhoods in their letter requested a 5-year extension. It's clear to me that that's not something that you feel comfortable with or that you would want to pursue. But you have an option, don't you, to ask to extend the district until such time as the rezoning and the other protections are in place that would allow you and the neighbors to work through it without the fear that of the lack of a quorum, a disagreement, amendments, something. You've been down this road more times than anyone on this call. Not all planning, no matter how well intentioned or how much consensus there is, it goes smoothly and exactly as one wants, and would prevent that window from opening. So that's a series of many thoughts all in one. I'm sorry, comment, but I hope that you understand it's in the spirit of trying to protect you, the neighborhood, the neighbors, and allow people to be together rather than anyone being advantaged and taking.
That's okay.
Being able,
I'll read
anyone being able to
way.
take advantage of the whole.
That's okay.
I think it's Commissioner Bowers, hopefully seconding my thoughts.
There we go.
Yeah, but I do have a couple of questions about the option you presented. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
It's really not so much I don't know if you're speaking to me or to Councilmember Withers. This is Bill Purcell.
I'll just wait to hear Councilman Withers' thoughts on that, and then I'd like to know what the downside of that would be.
Sure. Well, I guess a couple of things. What I would probably like to do, if we can, is to turn it over to Mr. Kane, who has been, very, very helpful to me in understanding the staff's position about that extension, and what potential challenges there are to that. So I don't know if Mr. Kane can speak to that piece, but I will say I totally understand the concern, and like I said, that's why I've been pretty diligent in trying to reach out to as many of those parcel owners as I can. My understanding, and perhaps Mr. Kane can speak to this as well, is that for new development in particular, if the areas within the conservation overlay, they largely, although not entirely, defer to the Historic Zoning Commission, which covers most of this area. So we really are talking about Woodland Street, and Woodland Street has a really interesting way that the East Bank redevelopment district and the Five Points redevelopment district sort of lock fingers. It's an interesting pattern. If you haven't looked at that map, I would encourage everyone to do that. But the number of buildings that are, if what Mr. Purcell has stated were to happen, the number of properties that would be outside of any kind of an overlay is actually very small. And because, for instance, there's a parcel assemblage that is, it's actually 3 parcels in a row. It's like 943 to 947 Woodland. It was very damaged by the tornado. They actually, that building assemblage, they are working with insurance. And also that particular parcel assemblage already has a site plan that's submitted to the codes department. We needed to do a BZA special exception for their parking for them. That is already in place. So they already have a site plan that's in place, and that parcel assemblage is actually located in the East Bank redevelopment district. So from the planning standpoint, like, I'm looking at both sides of Woodland just to go ahead and unify that zoning all at one time. But that parcel assemblage in particular is actually still within the East Bank redevelopment district. So the ones that would come out and not have any kind of a redevelopment district, the main ones are the building that is home to Noble's Bar and Grill, which is on Main Street, but it's rebuilt and is reopened. It is the old First Tennessee Bank, or First Horizon, which is reopening as is. You've got the Hill Center, 5 Points, which Jimmy Granberry is already working on a redevelopment, rebuilding through insurance. You have the Park Center property. I'm in discussions with Will Connolly, who's the new CEO of Park Center, about their property. It ends up not actually being that many buildings that are exposed in that kind of a way. And so, to my mind, I understand that concern, but I think that the number of parcels that we're looking at that would have a gap, if that were to occur, it is actually few that wouldn't have any kind of design guidance. But what I'd like to do, if we can, is if Mr. Kane is available, to have Mr. Kane kind of speak to the staff's perspective on the extension and what that would require. If Mr. Kane's on the call still.
He is, I think.
So Joe, if you can hear, please address the question on the tech aspects of economic blight and whether the district needs it, and also maybe an insight into timing. I think the same concerns seem to be for Mr. Withers and others about getting zoning through in a timeline. We would be in a real time crunch now, I think. This would be after my watch to get this done, but I think we could probably do it. Could you talk to timing if we did move forward, and to economic blight and standards, and how whether this district is.
So it looks like Joe was having an internet connectivity issue, and I'm thinking that he's actually trying to call back in right now, because I see that he's up twice on the screen. So we might need to give him a moment to be able to chime in.
Is there perhaps another person present at MDHA who could maybe get that started from the staff's perspective?
Well, we all have involvement in redevelopment districts. Joe is our expert on the technical aspects of determining economic blight, which has specific tools that he uses. He is the best, and I think it'd be wise if we wait for him. I would just say you will receive in your board packets a timeline that we would have to follow to extend this. We're already behind that timeline, should you ask us to proceed. I think we can make it, but we're really going to have to hustle. We need a clear guidance from the board on whether you want us to extend this or not. Left to our own devices, we will let it continue to expire as originally planned. But if you tell us to, we'll go after it hard.
Okay, it looks like Joe is sharing his screen. And Joe, can you speak at this point?
I hope I can. Can you hear me at all?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. I'm not exactly sure what the problems are. I wanted to bring up this graphic right here, which Councilman alluded to about the historic overlays in and around the area. The center portion that is in the dark blue is the 5 points redevelopment plan that actually kind of has 5 points kind of sticking out of it as in all directions as it heads in. So that dark blue area is the 5 points redevelopment district. This green one that adjoins it is the Main Street redevelopment district that extends down Main Street. The Edgefield National Register district is over here. There actually are not properties that are proper, that are inside the boundaries per se of that, but it has, as Mayor Purcell mentioned, that it has always been a very good neighbor and very active in the overall 5 Points area is the commercial neighborhood with that. This light green area that's kind of got dots all around it is the Lachlan Springs East End conservation area. And that includes just about all of 5 Points. It runs up this line right through here. And so as the councilman was saying, there's a very few areas, it's this area right here along Woodland Street that is not inside a conservation area that does not have the controls right now. So I wanted to point that out. As far as the blight goes, I have not done, and the staff has not done, a boots on the ground walk of the area to see what the actual damage was that was caused by the tornado. And so that is something that we would certainly do here within, before we would take some action, is get our get our boots on the ground, walk that over the course of the next few days, so we would be able to have a definitive answer on that where it comes through with that. But that's what we're looking for as far as that blight, and there is without question damaged properties in and around there. And then, was there any other specific questions you would like to ask?
Well, I think that Mr. If I may, I'll try to recite it from memory. But if we go to that screen, and I'll work from 10th Street going west. So that first parcel at the top, right next to the dotted line, that one is Noble's Bar and Grill, which is rebuilt. The next parcel south, which is on Woodland, is the old First Tennessee building, which is now First Horizon, which is ready to reopen. Then you come down and you've got the Hill Center 5 Points, which is rebuilding once they get their insurance settled. Then moving to the west, you have the Park Center building, which they are, Will Connolly, the CEO, says that they are retaining that property. They are sort of moving a lot of their services to a new building up on North First Street nearby, but Mr. Connell let me know that they are planning on retaining that building and doing some repairs and maybe looking at other services that they might provide there out of that Park Center building. Then you go down, there is like a beauty salon, there is Hossey and Hossey Locksmith, which is there for the long term. There is the Nashville Firemen's Credit Union, which is, in good repair, and they're staying there. Then you jump back to the north, across the street. You have what used to be the old Edgefield sports bar, which is now called Lakeside Lounge, and it has Pfefferts Road architecture in the basement. They are there for the long term. And then you have the 901 Woodland building, which most famously has WeWorks in it. That building has been repaired, and they are there. So again, that's kind of what I come back to is from a risk standpoint, we are only looking at, a handful of parcels at the most that we're looking at that potentially could have exposure if the rezoning were not to be approved in December for whatever reason. But I think also Mr. Kane had provided some information, at least to me, that was instructive early on in the decision, which is that, the property value, the percentage of property value change in the area relative to the county is quite high. Certainly, as I mentioned, when you look at the Boom Baz building, which sold as is for $4.1 million a few maybe 2 weeks ago. Then there's the YCAP gym. When you take that little thing from the little piece of Russell from 10th over to 11th, you got the Boom Boss building, was just sold for 4.1 million. Then you've got the YCAP gym, which is YMCA Middle Tennessee is retained. They're using that as offices. It's under renovation. We are so fortunate that East End neighbor Mark and Patty Sanders have purchased the YCAP building, the historic church itself, and they are working on renovations of that specifically. So that property sold, I want to say, for $1.5 million. So that just gets back to, again, even in the tornado affected area, one of the ironies of the path of the tornado is when you look at those two arms of the 5 Points redevelopment district that go down Woodland and Fatherland, the tornado mostly went down Holly and Russell. So it sort of went in between. There aren't actually a lot of parcels that are in the redevelopment district that were heavily affected, although there are some. But almost all of those are in some state of repair that are within the redevelopment district that were damaged within Holly and Russell, which technically isn't in the redevelopment district, but it's between it. As I mentioned, we've had about a dozen houses that have already gone through the process so far with the Metro Historic Zoning Commission to have new house plans approved. In some cases, those lots where they became vacant lots have sold for as much as $350,000 for just the lot. Plus, folks are putting improvements back on it that are several $100,000 additional dollars in value. And that to me goes back to, again, like, you know, what is if I have to go to the council and say that blight exists in this area, I believe I would have a lot of pushback from my colleagues, particularly in North Nashville and Hermitage, who really have been impacted. I believe that would be a difficult case to make at the council, and I believe that there would be objections to that as well.
Are there other questions?
Commissioner Thaden, may I, Madam Chair, I hear everything that Commissioner Withers is saying, and he's my council member, and I appreciate him very much. I do think there is some question about the legal standard, and obviously Mr. Kane is the person on point for us on that issue. As I indicated earlier, the success, the economic improvement of 5 Points is, I agree with Councilman Withers, is strong. The success of the downtown is even stronger. As we move through our districts, those issues are real, but the question then turns to protecting what you've done, protecting the investments that you've made, protecting the future, and that can be captured in this process, but it's also a political process as well. Here's a thought, and I present it not in the form of a motion yet, but for the committee, both committees to consider. I think we have both committees now full quorum for both development and finance. We have a full board meeting next week. That's the last chance that we would have, I think, within this calendar to take action. It may be that if that's what the committees would like, we could move this issue to the full board, which is where it would naturally go and has to go for final decision. We've had the neighborhoods asking us to do that, so I think it would be my instinct that we should try to honor the neighborhood's desire, and I think Councilman Withers specifically said he would be open to having the neighborhoods be heard. That would give Mr. Kane and his team and their boots a chance to get out on the ground and see what's there, think with our legal staff about not just the existence of blight, but the protection of blight, the other things, the things that have allowed us to do all those good things downtown. A more restrictive definition, were it simply the existence of blight, would basically constrain our development opportunities in much of Nashville now and in the future. So it would give him a chance to think through that and present to us, and for our board council to advise us as well. it would give us a chance for the neighborhoods to be heard, who obviously, having written to us, want to be heard and have the opportunity then to speak as well. And lastly, Commissioner Bowers, this may be where she was going, it would give the council member and the neighborhoods the opportunity to think through whether he would be benefited from not a long or multi-year extension, but rather a contingent extension, which simply says we're working hard as a community to protect ourselves and protect the future, and we're going to keep the protections we have in place until such time as we have replaced them with council action and planning department support with these other things. It strikes me that that's something that hasn't been on the table before, and might be worth at least the council member thinking about and thinking with the neighbors about in an effort to bring everybody together. You've said that HG Hill Company supports your zoning. It may very well be that this is no extension at all, that it's all done on December the 15th, and on January 1, everyone lives happily ever after. But it would certainly keep everyone at the table and encourage everyone to work with you in order to make sure that there was no incentive to create a gap in the protections for your neighborhoods. Just my thinking.
This is Paulette Coleman, and I have heard and been persuaded by the comments made by Council Member Withers, but I still have some concerns because I'm always sensitive to the request of neighborhood associations and neighborhood people and balancing that. What I had thought is maybe if there were an additional year, similar to what Chair Purcell said in terms of the contingent, that might be a way to go. I would like to see these alternatives that have been mentioned played out, and I would like to see what our development team with Kane and company find out before I am willing to make a decision. And I understand, and my dilemma is really just balancing all of these kinds of issues. I truly appreciate Councilmember Withers, your sensitivity and empathy toward what has happened in North Nashville, which is dear to my heart because that's where my church is and that's where I spend a lot of time, and also Hermitage. And we always remember almost the mantra with redevelopment districts from neighborhood residents is that it's always designed to benefit, entertainment, tourism, what have you, anything but the neighbors. And I think we cannot ignore that.
I'm sorry, Emily. I just got one question for Councilman Withers. After the conversation, I'm still not clear. What are you recommending? What are you clearly recommending? Are you recommending that we let it expire at the end of 1 year? Are you recommending that we extend it for 5 years? I think I understand, I do understand what our chair is kind of has set out for food for thought, but what is your belief about the recommendation? What's coming from your community? What's your position?
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And sorry, I mean, my recommendation is no extension at all.
Okay.
However, I do really appreciate. I think Commissioner Purcell has a really interesting idea that I think has not been thought of before. Is to say that you like a contingency until at least some of these other protections are in place, which could happen in December. The property owner community, many of whom are local business owners who also live in East Nashville, are not necessarily in favor of extending the redevelopment either. And there are some
that's good enough.
And I'll give you just one example. And this is kind of a minor thing, but it kind of again goes back to right now, if you want to know if a use is permitted in your building or if you can do something with your business, there's the land use table. And then there's also MDHA, and do those actually align today or not? And we have a lot of uses today, such as short-term rentals, for instance, that are very controversial. It's kind of, there's an irony that technically hotels aren't allowed, but residential units are, and because they have base commercial zoning. In an ironic way, the redevelopment district actually promotes building something as a residential unit and then turning it into a short-term rental, versus just saying we want to do a hotel, right? So there are some perverse, I guess, things that are developing in the last couple of years as our economy is changing, as new uses are coming in. You do also have, again, this point about there are properties that have OR20 zoning. Technically, in their base zoning, they could use it as an office building. Back in the day, the community said, we don't want office uses on that parcel. And so technically, those buildings are not allowed to have offices under the land use plan, but their neighbors are. And literally every other house in the community can also be turned into a home office, which was the original intent of OR. So there are a lot of things like that that are sort of creating confusion and tension, I guess, for property owners that are trying to figure out what they can do with their building. And again, almost all of these are our local neighbors. We actually have very few. We're very fortunate, other than Boombas itself. I don't know the owner of that one, but we continue to be really blessed in East Nashville that most of the property owners and business owners are also our neighbors, right? So they get it from both sides. And what I'm hearing from them is that they find that the redevelopment district, land use plan, and or design guidelines sort of create more confusion for them than certainty. And neighbors, up until the tornado came, sort of said the same. I mean, there's the building where Van Dyke Bed and Beverage is located, which is at, I think, 103 South 11th. The redevelopment district guidelines were sort of brought out to the historic commission, zoning commission, is like, this allows us to do 3-story buildings. There's a little bit of an irony that these design guidelines state that you can do 3-story buildings. The Metro Historic Zoning Commission may or may not agree with that for the context, but the fact that there's this document out there that someone goes to and says, this allows me to do a 3-story building, creates tension for the Historic Zoning Commission. So there are some things about that I think the quicker we can get past that document, I think the better it is for the neighbors to have certainty, the property owners and the business owners. So everyone really is on the same page. And that kind of is what I've been hearing from folks for a little while, but even especially after the tornado. So I definitely would not recommend even a 1-year extension. I mean, just to be really honest with you, I am intrigued by Commissioner Purcell's idea of having some sort of a contingency, maybe if we can do that, to say that we want to make sure that protections are in place, at least as much as we can get, in a reasonable time frame, but that we kind of exit it, because some of those design guidelines just don't necessarily meet what we're seeing in terms of development patterns or building trends these days. Another one that I'll cite briefly is this is one where I actually have a fair amount of disagreement with some property owners and folks who want to extend the redevelopment district. The irony is that in the heart of 5 Points, where it has CS zoning, which is the worst zoning you can have, but the design guidelines there call for buildings of only 2 stories, with a possible third as long as it's residential. But you can go a couple of parcels out and they're allowed to build 3-story buildings with none of those restrictions. There is a residential subdistrict that says it needs to look residential, but you could build a building that is 100% office building. It has to sort of resemble a residential building, but it can be 3 stories. Then you go to the parcel next door, and if they want to do a 3-story building, the 3rd floor has to be a residential unit. Which from a built form standpoint just doesn't make sense. So like if there's a 3-story building with that 3rd floor step back, from a neighborhood standpoint, what difference does it make if it's an office use or a residential use? And again, you get that irony that if someone builds that 3rd floor unit as residential, because of the cost of land prices these days, you are almost 100% guaranteed it's going to be short-term rental. And it's just, again, like so many things have changed in the past, that I would be satisfied that if we can get the zoning piece done, that mostly we're done anyway. If we were to look at a UDO, which I would love support from this board to do, I think it's realistic to say that it would be wise to sort of have a whole fresh round of community meetings. We have so many architects and civil engineers, again, who live in this neighborhood, who care about this neighborhood, and maybe have some fresh ideas. So if we were to do some sort of an extension of that for any longer period of time, even a year, I would say it would probably be good just to have a fresh round of community meetings to see like what is important to people today. And that may not always be what was important to people 20 years ago.
Got it. So let me make sure I understand the decision-making framework. If we do nothing, it simply expires.
That's correct.
So someone would need to prepare a resolution to either, so there is an action by no action, which is simply expiration. So are you coming to MDHA so why are we having this conversation if the request from the council and from the community is not to extend it?
The reason why we're having this conversation, that's an excellent question. The reason why we're having it is because we have longstanding, dedicated pillars of our community whom we respect very highly. We respect the work that they have done and continue to do. And they have asked MDHA to consider an extension of some time. I mean, the initial request was for 5 years in order to kind of sync up with the East Bank redevelopment district. But as I've said, the discussion that was had about a year ago, even with the same community, was not to extend it. What has changed somewhat is the tornado, which is a little bit of a transient matter, and as to whether or not the tornado itself has introduced blight in an area where it did not exist, I would defer to staff on that. But the evidence that I'm seeing compared to a lot of my other Metro Council district council member colleagues is that, how do you define something as blighted, or even make a suggestion that something's blighted, or make a council action based on a presumption of blight when parcels that are tornado damaged are being purchased for 7 figures cash on an almost weekly basis, often with intents to keep those buildings and just renovate them, which is fabulous. That's what we want. But how do you then make that argument that is predicated upon the existence of blight? So that is my real challenge. That I know that our community has just such a great record of being forward-thinking and very engaged, as Commissioner Purcell stated. I believe that if you really opened it up to the community and had community meetings, which I believe you would have to do even for an extension, if you really opened that up, I think you would get a lot of really good, very divergent, but really good feedback that probably would lead to different design guidelines anyway. So that's why I'm saying that would, if you were to do a lengthy extension that's maybe not contingent on the rezoning, that would need to be a whole other process that we would probably need to start from scratch to figure out, again, what some of those, what community members think is important or not today. The main thing that I keep getting from our neighbors is that they're concerned about specific plans. And again, the redevelopment district is silent on the matter of specific plans. Specific plans, if they are within a conservation overlay, which most of this area is, actually have 4 public hearings. So if folks in the community have a concern about a specific plan being issued, they would have 4 public hearings where they could have comment on that. So I don't, again, even that would take 6 months to 9 months for someone to introduce and pass a specific plan. If that's what the concern is, that is the lengthy process. That is built in by legislation that would have 3 or 4 public hearings and would also have a lot of community feedback. So I don't find that the community concern that's been expressed about specific plans is actually remedied by this extension. And that's part of my reasoning for not necessarily wanting to do an extension of the redevelopment district, is I don't feel like it actually addresses what the community concern that's been stated is.
Got it. So I'm really trying to understand real clearly. There has to be a resolution that comes before the board to vote. Who does the resolution come from, and what is it? because a decision can be made by simply not putting a resolution in front of MDHA. So I'm assuming that any resolution that comes before MDHA is what the community desires, which is different than letting it expire December 31st. And so for whatever reasons, and I own property in East Nashville, for whatever the thousands of reasons from the many community groups, I'm just trying to figure out, when we vote, are we voting on a resolution that reflects, at least from the councilman's perspective, the will of the people? That's all. That really is the only question I'm asking. Who does it come from, and what should we expect to see?
And I believe that the legal counsel or Mr. Kane would need to answer that question. So.
Well, while we're waiting, this is Bill Purcell, if I might be recognized, and I think the resolution comes from one of us, and is in whatever form it may be. You're right, no action, it expires. But the matter is it could be before us. It's before us at the moment. And a resolution brought would then be voted on by the board. It would go from us into the world. In the normal circumstance, the council member from the district would advance that resolution as an ordinance in the council. That would then be a question for the council member at that point, a hypothetical question now. And in those cases where an individual district council member is not able to, either for a conflict purpose or for whatever reason, able to advance it, there is a precedent, considerable precedent, for council members at large to take up those issues and bring them to the full council to pursue them for the agency. That's a harder road. And I will say now what, Brett, you don't need to say. There is a high level of deference to the individual district council member. It is very a unique situation in which a council member at large and the full council would override a council member's objection in a land use matter. I can't speak to redevelopment districts. I don't think there's ever been a redevelopment district request by MDHA that was opposed by the council member. But here's a thought, and I think this is where you are. I am prepared, and I think the council member has suggested this as well in a fashion that we hear from the neighborhood at the full board meeting. I'm prepared to say that, to propose a motion that would say the full board should consider all of the options for the 5 Points redevelopment district at its next meeting and hear from the parties concerned. That would put the matter on our agenda for next week. We can hear again from the council member, or staff can report his comments. We can hear from the neighborhoods at that time. We can hear from anyone else who wants to be heard. And because I'm an eternal optimist, it could be that between now and next week, because I know how hard Brett works, it's possible that a grand compromise would be proposed to us that meets the needs of, and the consensus comes. It's possible, Paulette, you've seen this happen. It's usually inspired by higher powers, but it could happen that we suddenly looked up in a meeting next week and found there was a solution somewhere in the middle of this that protected the current situation, kept everyone working together, and resulted in a council approval of rezoning and other matters, which meets most everyone's needs. It could happen. That would be my thought about a motion. If there's some comfort about that, I would propose it as a motion. If there are questions or concerns or objections, then I would reconsider.
I'm absolutely comfortable hearing from the community and taking that opportunity to ensure that it sounds like the community is in full support of the zoning that's being proposed. And so to me, it seems like that this is a point of clarification because I believe that the council member did a fantastic job explaining that effectively there are better and more effective tools that you are trying to put in place in order to do the protection that the community is in fact requesting. And we've identified that the current redevelopment plan is in fact not it. And so it seems to me that we should certainly hear from the community and make sure that we are all on the same page and understanding that, or if there's anything else we're missing. And so I would certainly support your motion.
Why don't you go ahead and make the motion?
Okay. My motion would be then that the full board consider all of the options for the 5 Points redevelopment district at its next meeting and hear from the neighborhoods and other interested parties.
So moved.
Second.
Might conduct a roll call, Chair.
Yes. Saul, are you conducting it or do you want me to?
I can do that. So Chair Thaden.
Yes.
Mr. Purcell.
Yes.
Mr. Ansari.
Yes.
Ms. Batts. Ms. Batts on?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, so 4 votes for. Are there any votes against? Sorry. So Commissioner Campbell's not on, is that correct? Okay, so we have 4 votes for and 0 against, so the motion passes.
May I have a point of order very quickly?
Yes.
You're only taking the votes of which committee?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So this was for, sorry, Ms. Coleman. Okay, that was for finance and audit for development, probably for development committee. Chair Ansari, how do you vote?
Yes.
You voted yes.
Yes.
Chair Purcell, you voted yes. Commissioner Coleman.
Yes.
Okay. And Commissioner Thaden.
Yes.
Okay. So the resolution passes both committees. The motion passes.
And well, thank you, commissioners, for hearing me today and also hearing my neighbors and giving your thought and consideration of this. And I know we'll revisit it soon. And I request your best wishes as all of this moves forward over the next couple of months. And just as from my understanding, in terms of hearing from neighborhoods or interested parties at next week's meeting, would that be at a public hearing, or are you looking for letters, or what is the method that's recommended, especially under the COVID situation? What is the method that's recommended that folks would contact the board?
Yes, and related to that is how will the neighborhood groups and citizens be notified?
Jim, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, we will, as we do in all our board meetings, post on the website and publish in the paper the agenda, and for this one, as best we can in the next probably 6 to 8 hours, a write-up of what we know. And the way they will be able to, they will either call in for the public hearing, or they can send comments in written form. That's been done both ways previously. So, but if they'd like to write or email, Jamie Berry is our point of contact. She collects all those, and then she arranges for them to get 2 minutes each to make their comments in the public forum on this forum that we have here on the WebEx. So we have call-in instructions. They'll call in and have their moment to pass on their information. So that's how we've done it previously. In the last few meetings, we've had a couple of public comments. We haven't had, I think there may be a high volume here, so we'll just have to be ready for one. And we'll get the data we can on the options available to the board on Tuesday. I would just point out that we have public meeting requirements, I believe statutory, and we'll check this, that we had planned to do if this was something people wanted us to do earlier. We have to resequence our schedule, and we'll present that schedule on Tuesday. Make sure this is feasible for us to meet our timelines to get into council in time to vote at the December board meetings, the December council meetings. But that's contact Jamie, and we'll get it in the paper, we'll get it on our website, and that's the way we do public notification.
Jim, it's quite hard to hear you. If you could speak up a bit more, or we could get the audio a little closer to you. Councilman Weathers, is this giving you enough information, or my hope would be that Jamie could get something to you tomorrow that you could disseminate to the neighborhood associations. Jim, is that feasible? And Saul, is that compliant with noticing?
Yes, to the legal question. I think you'll be fine with that. Today is we've already had. I don't know what Jamie has done yet today in terms of announcing the meeting. My guess it's already been advertised, but I think we'll be compliant given the urgency of the situation. I think you'll be okay.
And so for clarity, can you hear me better now? I took my mask
Yes.
off. So we will post on the website the agenda with notification of the topic and instructions on how you were to call in and who to contact to arrange that. Jamie Berry is the point of contact. People have to notify her within a certain time frame. I think it's a day ahead of time, not later than a day ahead of time. And then they get to call in. They get the WebEx instructions. They call in, and in sequence, they get to appear before the board and give their verbal. If they want to write us or email us, Jamie's there, and she will collect all of those, and we will read them at the board. If they cannot make the board meeting because of work or other commitments. That's our two standard factors. It goes to the website, goes to paper, as a public notification.
May I speak?
I would just, okay, this is Paulette. I would just suggest that many of the neighborhoods and those representing the associations may not look at the website and may not read the paper. So whatever other mechanisms that we can target the people, whether it's council member Withers, e-blast list or whatever. I just think we need to go beyond those two standard because this is a very specific and neighborhood targeted issue.
Jamie, I heard that you were trying to speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, I basically was going to reiterate kind of what Paulette said right before she said it. I was just going to say that because this is specific to the 5 Points Redevelopment District, we don't want to just do our regular posting on the web. I think there needs to be some type of outreach to the folks in and near the 5 Points Redevelopment District. And so, Brett, I'm open to your suggestions. Or Joe, I'm assuming that if we had more time, we would actually have done a mailer on such topic like this. Is that correct? Or maybe Brett. I don't know if that's a council-led thing or an MDHA-led thing, but I would assume that there would have been some type of mailer. So I just wanted to throw that out there that, we really need to focus on getting the folks who are in the district or near the district. And I just want to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward to do that. And so again, Joe or Brett, if you guys can weigh in on what we would normally do, I would assume again that it would be some type of mailer.
This is Joe Kane. I hope you can hear me. There will be an official, if we decide to amend the plan, there will be an official public hearing as required by state law. That will take place in front of Metro Council. That is a requirement by state law on the public hearing, and that does include direct mailing as well as advertising in the newspaper for 3 weeks and the like. When we typically have just public meetings, which is what we would be looking for at our next board meeting, they also do generally get mailing, but I believe at this point in time, by the time we got the mail out, they may not be receiving it to Monday, which will be very short notice. But a public meeting is not required. The public hearing is required in front of City Council.
Commissioner Thaden, Bill Purcell. I would say from some experience, and Councilman Withers, you may have the same experience. We received a letter from the 3 neighborhood association presidents. If you send an email today to the 3 neighborhood association presidents in response to the letter they sent you, they will, by dinner time, make sure that every member of those neighborhood associations and everyone who has talked to them. So I have a high level of confidence. Councilman Withers, would you agree?
I concur, yes.
Okay. So we could start just this afternoon sending this motion to the neighborhood associations in response to their letter to us, because they wrote to us. Now we're responding back, and the councilman will fill in the rest of the gaps. I know that, and there's a listserv. There's this. In fact, I'm kind of expecting there's already notifications moving through the neighborhood, since I see the number of people on this call that I don't recognize the numbers of. But I agree with Jamie. Everything we need to do, we should do.
And so, speaking on that, Brett, you and I can get together at some point, and I do think that if anybody wants to email something, they can email it directly to me or to you. Just want to make sure it gets to the board. And then if they do want to speak during public comment, I can send you some information that you can put out via email to tell them exactly what they need to do, which is to contact me before close of business, 4 p.m. on Monday. So just so that we're on the same page, let's just make sure that we get those those emails out and reaching the correct people who would want to speak on this. Thank you.
Councilman Withers, may I ask one more question? The council has begun allowing some in-person, I believe, appearances. Is that fair? Is that true?
That's correct. Vice Mayor Schulman had created a program. Now, here's the thing about it, though, but he created a program where, the Metro Council meets twice a month. The first meeting of the month is always our public hearing on zoning bills. And again, this rezoning plan is already scheduled for a Metro Council public hearing on December the 1st. But Vice Mayor Schulman created a program where there's a public comment period just on any other topic that occurs during the second meeting of the month. You do need to register, I believe, with the Metro Clerk's office in advance in order to participate in that. The one rule that they typically have, though, is that the public comment at that second meeting of the month cannot be about other matters that are otherwise before the Metro Council. So you would not do public comment on something that also is going to have like a zoning bill public hearing.
No, I'm sorry.
There is an opportunity, yes.
But you are now having, but physical appearances have been restored to the council. You are actually, during the regular public hearings, you are allowing people to come physically and present. Is that right?
That's correct. And in fact, you've raised a really good point, Mr. Purcell, that I believe that due to we had our first in-person meeting on Tuesday at the Music City Center Convention Center. We did have members of the public attend. I would have to seek clarification from Council Attorney Cooper, but I believe that because of the governor's executive order that allowed us to meet virtually expiring, that public comment needs to take place in person going forward at the Metro Council, I believe. But I
think as of November, that's probably true, actually. But anyway, I just was throwing out that whether or not, because these are all neighbors, these are neighbors that are actually literally blocks from our headquarters. And I leave it to staff. If they want to give them the opportunity to come and appear, they can make a decision about the health and welfare. I don't think it's legally required, but if that's what they wanted to do, they might find it was easier to walk across the street to present. Council member, just a thought. Anyway, sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for all of your time, Councilmember Withers. We really appreciate it. I understand as well. Feel free to go back to your actual job.
All right. Well, thank you. Y'all have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for your service and consideration today.
Thank you.
Friday. Bye-bye.
All right. So we have some additional items on the agenda, and we're certainly not going to get through all of them in the time remaining. So Jim, I believe all of them are informational or updates. Is there a priority for anything specifically remaining on the agenda for today?
Well, from the staff, our priority was to discuss Envision as it was a retreat task. The length of that presentation exceeds the time you have remaining today. I recommend we go to the top of the agenda, work through as far as we can, and pick up where we are on Tuesday. And if we don't get to the Envision, we'll have to roll it back to November.
Jim, Is there any way we can get that presentation?
Sure.
Yeah, if we that would, I think that would help expedite the process. But I agree with you. We probably won't have time today.
I believe the presentation was emailed to all commissioners. That was letting us know that we should look at the electronic copy that was delivered to us for this meeting today, rather than looking at the presentation that was given to us in hard copy. So
we'll send out the presentation we are ready to give now. We'll send it out. Matt, send it out now. We'll send it to you right now.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move to the cash investment policy.
So you have a write-up in your package on cash investments. Our cash investment policy has been standing for a good period of time. Jim Filger is our primary architect of this. So Jim, could you take the cash investment policy and go through a brief discussion of it with the commissioners?
And we sent out a summary of kind of an overview of the cash investment policy that we have. We kind of did an update to it. Basically, the situation we're in, because we're a governmental agency, our cash is considered government. It has the same restrictions as the funds of the state of Tennessee and of local governments. And basically that is that cash deposits have to be covered either by FDIC insurance, which goes up to $250,000, or has to be collateralized. The problem that we've gotten into in the last several years is that the banks have to pay a certain fee for the sake of having their deposits collateralized. And what we found is most banks are not interested in receiving our money for interest-bearing deposits. At one time, we had a ladder of investments. So like every Wednesday, we would be having investments mature. If we needed the money at that time, we would take the money, we would mature those investments. Otherwise, we would put the money out to the highest bidder. That got to the situation where basically no one was providing bids anymore. If they did, it was like 5 basis points or 6 basis points, almost nothing. So what we have ended up doing is our primary bank, Pinnacle Bank, has offered us, last time we renewed the contract with them, is that they would give us 17 basis points over the federal funds rate. Federal funds rate is the overnight thing between banks. And that rate has been like 25 basis points for the last probably a year or so. So, and also they said that they would put a floor of 42 basis points, which basically is where it is right now. With Pinnacle Bank, in addition to getting that rate of return, they're also giving us such things as no fees on the multiple accounts that we have, and also like wire transfers. They're giving us those for free. So we're getting quite an economic benefit in addition to the interest rate they're paying, which is 42 basis points. We've looked at comparable kind of investments. The state of Tennessee has a local government investment pool, and you put money in there pretty much on a very liquid basis. Last month, they were giving us 27 basis points. In September, that dropped down to 25 basis points. We also have some cash which is going into required escrow accounts. And for example, with FHA loans, we have accounts with Walker and Dunlap, which either receive no interest rate at all or a very nominal, a few basis points. We happened several months ago when interest rates were a little bit higher. We renewed some investments with Citizens Bank. At that time, they told us that they needed our investment for requirements that the regulators had. we ended up with something like 1.25%, which now looks really, really good compared to what we're getting otherwise. With Citizens Bank, we have something called it's called CDARS. It's basically what they do, they take the money and they distribute it among a bunch of different banks, each of which has a limit of the FDIC insurance rate of $250,000. And so they're kind of spread out that way, and they don't have to be collateralized. Very recently, Pinnacle Bank got away from collateralizing our investment, and they did a very similar approach called the Insured Cash Sweep, ICS. And so what they do overnight, they take all the deposits that we have in all of our accounts, they distribute it through a service so that all of our funds are in banks which are insured up to $250,000. But we have immediate liquidity for those the following morning. So basically, that's where we are in terms of cash deposits. We are limited in terms of what we can do. We can't put into mutual funds. We can't put into investments. We can't put into, like corporate bonds and so on. We're pretty well limited to either FDIC insurance or collateralized bank deposits. So with that, I'll open it for any questions.
Any questions from the commissioners?
Yes. I don't remember, and it may have stated it. About how much do we have in those kinds of accounts?
In the CDARS that we have, which are term investments, we have a Citizens Bank. And Melinda, if you're on, you may need to correct me on this. I'm thinking we have something now like 1,025,000 or 1,250,000. That's in 2 or 3 different CDARS. In the other cash accounts, it's with all the escrow accounts, the reserve accounts, our operating accounts, all that. We're probably in the range of Melinda, if you can chime in on this, we're probably in the range of probably what, $15–20 million.
But with the replacement reserves are about 50 million, so
50.
So it'll be closer to about 100 million probably.
Okay.
With all the escrows.
Yeah.
Okay, so outside of the CDARS, we have potentially up to $100 million in those collateralized accounts, or because you mentioned a lot of different things, so I'm not sure what's included in that 100 million.
I think those are cash reserves, right? Or...
Yes, and those, most of those funds are with Pinnacle Bank. Most of our reserve accounts, as well as our operating accounts, they have something equivalent to a CDARS called the Insured Cash Sweep,
right?
Where they overnight they distribute all of that, the $100 million among a whole lot of different banks, each of which has a $250,000 FDIC limit.
Thank you.
In addition to that, for some of the loans that we have additional loans, we have additional deposits with banks. For example, we recently closed a loan for the Red Oak Flats project, Boscobel 3, and we had that with Synergy Bank of Franklin, and so we have a cash account with them as well.
Thank you.
But most of the $100 million is with Pinnacle.
So let me just ask a question. It's a very simple numerical balance sheet focused question. How much cash does MDHA have on its balance sheet as an asset, not a liability that's a loan that's deposited at a bank? What is our cash? Are we saying we have $101 million cash position?
So, as of, I was looking at the balance sheet right now. As of September, we have 111 million of cash on the balance sheet. With the investment in Citizens, it's a little bit more than it's 2.2 million. 45 million of that is operating cash,
Yep.
And then 66.5 million is reserves and what Jim was talking about for the loans and all of our projects and the R4R, of course. So.
That's right. And so I'm just going back to the balance sheet conversation is the difference between the 111 and the 60 odd some odd million that's restricted funds and the 40 some odd million dollars that's operating. That is essentially the free cash position on our balance sheet. It's the delta between 111 minus restricted minus operating cash. Is that a fair statement?
The 111 equals the 66 plus the 45. So not sure. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Yes, I guess.
Okay.
Melinda, does the 66 million include reserves required by the federal government for the project-based housing units, former public housing units?
Yes, that's the majority of it. That's a little over 50 million of the 66. So.
Okay. And then for the tax credit properties, LIHTC properties, are there required reserves associated with that? And are those part of this also?
Yes, I ran it for the whole agency, so I didn't break out. So yes, they are, and they're included in that also.
Okay.
And they have replacement reserve requirements and other requirements depending on the investor partner. So
right, yes. Right. So those monies are part of this restrictive bucket of money.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And then the balance, the 44 million is strictly agency operating reserves. Am I right on that?
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
So I would like to request that additional information comes to the board in writing. I think when we're presenting our cash investment policy, it would be very helpful to actually lay that out and also lay out basically the interest rates and the additional benefits for those different buckets of money and where they're invested. Another thing that I just want to point out is our cash investment policy doesn't really read like a policy. It's reading like a narrative for what we've done. But I think that what we really need to be moving to is having a policy that sets forth procedurally how are we making decisions for where our cash is going. And I have every confidence that you all are making the decisions to optimize what is happening with our cash based upon what we need to do in terms of being in compliance. But I would like to see the policy written as such. So I think that those would be my two requests to come back to the board with a more formalized policy in the future.
Okay, well, we can do that, definitely.
Thank you very much. Do other people have questions or comments related to the information presented?
My only comment is thank you for including Citizens Bank among the groups with whom we work. I think that's very important. Thank you.
All right, if there's no additional question or discussion, I believe that the next presentation was the Promise Zone and Opportunity Zone, and I'm assuming we will not get through that in the next 5 minutes. Am I correct, Jim?
Yes.
All right, so with that, I would recommend that we postpone the additional agenda items until our next meeting on Tuesday morning. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
And a second. Okay, thank you, Bill. And with that, let's conclude the Joint Finance and Development Committee meeting. Those in favor, I'll say aye.
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 Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.